So I had this revelation in the last couple of days, and of course, I couldn't wait to share it all with you guys. And that is that we never get rejected. Yeah, you heard me right. I know it sounds crazy, right? Because probably you're thinking, what do you mean we get like people get rejected all the time in relationships and work situations and so many areas of life. But if you hear me out, I'm going to give you some scenarios that happened all actually in one night that made me realize that what we think is rejection is actually showing us what we believe about ourselves. It's not someone rejecting us, it's someone mirroring without them even realizing it how we feel about ourselves, and that determines what we perceive them to think about us. Have I lost you already? It's okay. I'm going to give you some examples to explain what I mean. So I was at an event the other night and I showed up super early, like so early that I was the first one there. And I'm not talking about like a little party. It was like a club event that would have like hundreds of people there. Well, I don't know the capacity, but the place was packed by the end of it. I was the first person there. And when I went in, I just made this assumption that all the bartenders and staff that were in there setting up were like thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with this girl? Like, she must be such a geek because she doesn't understand how to show up at a party, and she came by herself. And I just felt awkward because I thought they were thinking that I was awkward. So I started acting the way that I thought they perceived me. And I went and kind of hid in this room where it turns out that some of the waitresses and bar staff were just being given reminders of how to go about the night. And someone asked me if I was there to work. And I said, no, I'm here to enjoy the party. And they were like, oh. So in my head, I was like, wow, they must think I'm such an idiot because like I'm here early before anything gets started. Nobody else is here. And yeah, so I sat there and kind of kept to myself. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I guess I asked the two girls. I think in my head I was thinking like, okay, there are people around me, I could still talk to them. And so I asked two of the girls whether they were working there or like if there were other places that they had worked before similar to that. And they ended up telling me that they weren't waitressing there, they were doing promotions. And I was like, oh, cool. And then we started talking. They asked me what I did, and I talked about this channel and about my blog, Dance Me Free, and how I write about the power of dance and other arts to heal, like music, and kind of told them a little bit about my health situation. And one of the girls said that her dad has Parkinson's, and she's been so amazed to see like how many other modalities have helped her dad to connect more with his body and just be more in balance. And then she was like, and what you said just like reminded me that music could be so powerful. And she goes, I'm going to try that with my dad. There were so many beautiful moments in that conversation. The other girl was equally like inspiring. She looked like in her 20s, not even. She barely looked 20. But she was so wise. And I was like, wow, these girls, in my head, I perceived them to be, like, I thought that they were going to be snobby. They were young, beautiful, just like cool girls. And I perceived them to be snobby and to think that I was like not cool and older and just like not at their level of like, just being with it in terms of like music and events and all that. And instead, they turned out to be like I felt so excited being around them, and they made that earlier part of my night so good. And all throughout the night, I'd go back and they'd check in with me, and I'd check in with them. And I even ended up sending so many people at the event to them to sign up for their promos. And I told the organizer how amazing these girls were. And the point of all that is that because I perceived myself to be awkward, or that I thought that they would think I was like not cool for showing up so early, I started acting like that. And I also perceived what they would be like without getting to know them. And probably this dynamic comes from a long time ago, at least, like, I'm sure before then, but one of the areas that I can think that this dynamic got really, you know, kind of the seed got planted partly was like, I can think of this reminding me of high school, where I felt awkward and I didn't feel like I fit in. And then I started acting more like that and thinking other people didn't think that I fit in. And I also had a perception of what what the girls and the other people that were like kind of like the more popular people thought, like what they would be like. And I put all those perceptions on these people that I didn't know. And it's similar to what I could have ended up doing the whole night with these girls. But instead, thankfully, I opened up my mouth and decided to say something and get to know them. And it completely changed my perception of them. And it also changed my perception of me. Because I was like, what am I doing? I actually thought that I was being rejected before someone even got a chance to get to know me. Like, I mistook the way that they were presenting themselves, which they didn't do anything wrong, as like they must be rejecting me because I came early and because I don't really fit into this dynamic and I'm here by myself. And it was all wrong, and it was all like in my head. Later in the night, there was a guy that was looking at me. I was looking at him. I recognized him from other events. He seemed to be flirty, but we hadn't spoken yet. And so I went closer to the DJ booth and went up to him and sort of said, where he was leaning there, and I said, "You're in the safest spot in the whole place." Because secretly I needed the DJ booth area. There's like a little wall or something that I can lean on, and I needed that to get my balance. But I also was trying to find an excuse to talk to him and say something without saying, "Hey, I'm kind of interested, are you?" Like, because I didn't want to feel rejected. So I just decided to say something. And the thing is, he was smiling, but he didn't respond like clearly. I didn't know how he took it. So I was like, okay, fine. So I just went off and did my own thing. And later on, he was kind of getting a bit closer to me, but still not saying very much. And then eventually we did end up talking. And he ended up telling me that he was attracted to me, but he felt like, this was so interesting. I don't know if I'm going to say it the way that he said it, but it was very interesting to me. He said that I showed up in a way that I presented myself as less confident than I could have been. And at first I was kind of offended and confused, and I was like, what? And he said, well, you're very attractive, and there are other girls that don't even look like you, and they confidently came up to me and were like, made it clear that they were interested or whatever. You have what it takes to be able to do that, but you didn't. You came up to me less than confident, and it threw me off because I wasn't sure if I kept talking to you, if I was bothering you. And I think what he was trying to say, like, I'm still not explaining it very well, but I feel like what he was trying to say was that he was interested. He thought I was attractive. He thought that I had every right to, like, clearly make, say that I, like, act like I'm interested. But because of my awkwardness about myself, he started being confused about whether I was actually interested. So I took his confusion as rejection. So I walked away. And then he took the way that I was acting as like I was rejecting him. He said, you kind of acted like as if I was bothering you. And I was like, wow, if I had not even had this conversation with him, I wouldn't have known. And he made a really good point. He's like, you shouldn't care at all what I think. It's not really important, but I just thought I would let you know. And it made me realize, like, but that also means that there's something that he has an insecurity about because he wasn't sure whether I was bothered by him being around me. All of this comes from our perceived notion of what the other person thinks of us. Neither of us were actually rejecting the other. None of it was about rejection. It was actually about what we each feel about ourselves. I didn't want to hear him say, like, hey, I'm not attracted to you, like, leave me alone. He didn't want to feel the same thing from me. So we just left each other alone. And thankfully, again, just like with the other girls in the other room, for whatever reason, we started talking. We ended up actually going for breakfast after the event downstairs because we ended up talking and sharing with each other what we were actually feeling. But it was so fascinating to me because I was like, how many times do we do this in our life where we assume that the person in front of us has some sort of control as to whether they can, like, say, hey, you're not good enough for me, or I'm not into you, or I am. And so we're so terrified of facing that we don't want to hear it. But actually what the whole thing is, like, even if someone was not interested, it's not because they're rejecting us. It's because that's their preference. Like, maybe they prefer someone that looks a certain way. Maybe they don't feel good about themselves, so they are like, this whole rejecting thing is just a game for them. Like, there's so many things that could be going on. And I think that a lot of times rejection is not even a thing. It's just in our heads. And we end up taking what another person thinks as the truth of who we are. But actually, the reason the person reacts the way that we might not even want them to, or the reason that we take it so badly, is because we already feel that way about ourselves. Like, if this guy had really, like, insulted me or whatever, I would have taken it to heart because I might have already felt not so good about myself. If I felt good about myself, I wouldn't, like he said, I shouldn't care about what he thinks. Same thing with him. If he thought that I was just saying, like, hey, you're bothering me, if he felt good about himself, he wouldn't let that affect him at all. But if he does feel negatively about himself, he is gonna be like, wow, that really hurt. Like, I don't like that this, he might take it like it might hurt his pride or whatever. But it's not because we're getting rejected. It's because the person in front of us is reflecting to us what we actually already feel about ourselves. I find this really interesting because it's changed the way that I show up now, and I like actually what he said to me about you didn't show up as confidently as you could have, and you have a right to show up more confidently. And so I'm going to show up more confidently now and realize that actually if someone walks away from me or says something that I find insulting, it's not a reflection of who I am. It might be a reflection of what I already think about myself, and I get a chance to work on that. If someone hurts me because of what they think of me, it has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with like, what is it that I am so stuck on? What has hurt me in the past that has made me think that those things that they feel about me are true? Once we realize that, and once we have that awareness, nothing feels like rejection. It just feels like a lesson. It feels like a lesson about how you show up in the world and what you think about yourself. And I'm excited about that. I don't feel like I'm going to feel so rejected in the future. I feel like I'm going to feel like, wow, what did that teach me about how I perceive myself? I hope this made sense. I can't wait to talk to you again. I'm going to continue this in another video on a slightly different path with this, but for now I will leave it at that. Thanks for listening.